Welcome back. So today we are going to do an emotion index because we are in the midst of the Gold Cup break and pretty much every single team is in the middle of the Gold Cup break and they won't be playing until Saturday. So I thought this was a perfect time for me to kind of do an emotion index because after all, I think during the last break, which was a much longer break where each MLS team didn't play for like 2 weeks, I also did an emotion index, and I thought this would be a proper time to do one. And also, speaking of the Gold Cup, I haven't been able to watch a lot of Gold Cup action. In fact, I don't think I have even watched any Gold Cup action lately because, I've been relatively busy, and as you probably know, I am pretty much almost working full time now. Like this week, I've got 35 hours on my shift in terms of working, and the good news is in terms of the fact that even though I have to work this weekend, it's pretty much morning shift, so I don't really need to worry about missing a lot of these MLS action. But that also means that I have missed a lot of Gold Cup action because most of my shift has been happening in the evening. And in fact, I actually did not watch the US take on Haiti, and that I'll probably will not watch. Well, I will watch the US take on Martinique because they're playing on Sunday, and I would be able to watch that game. Although that being said, there's also some Sunday MLS action that is going on. But I'll probably won't do a review in terms of talk about the US in the Gold Cup because let's be honest, I don't think it's really worthy of me to kind of do a review during the group stage when it's pretty clear that the main part of how the US are going to be playing in the Gold Cup is really into the knockout round, because we know for sure that they're going to be moving on into the knockout stage. And once we get deeper into the tournament, that's when the Gold Cup really started to become serious, and we'll see whether or not if the US can, of course, win the Gold Cup and maybe beat Mexico to it this year, just like what they did in the Nations League. But that being said, enough of course the Gold Cup talk, because today we're going to talk about the emotion index. And as always, the first tier, if your team is there, everything is awesome. You can't wait until the playoff begin because you're near the top of the standings. So far so good. So far you probably are near the top of the standings, and you're definitely in a good position of making the playoffs. The middle tier, of course, is kind of the tier where you're kind of mediocre or you're kind of inconsistent. But at least you're not the worst team in the league, and you're not those teams that is dealing with a lot of issue. The fourth tier are those teams that is kind of dealing with those issue, but maybe for some of these teams there might be hope that they can turn things around, even though things are not going well. And then the fifth tier is really the panic tier. Like that fifth tier is literally the teams that are on long winless run and haven't won a game in a very long time, also known as a free fall that they're going through. And there's also some teams that might even think about throwing the towel early because they're so far back in terms of the playoff standing that they might as well just kind of call it a year, even though we're still only a little bit over 1/3 into the season. And also, by the way, I am wearing my new Minnesota United River kit that just arrived today. And I gotta say, this kit, I said before how it's not a bad kit. It kind of reminds me of the Drift kit a couple years ago, which that was a bad Minnesota United kit. But this one is just kind of like they put the turquoise color, and turquoise is actually one of my favorite color, and also the team color for the Loons. So the fact that they of course put one on here looks much better than the Drift kit that they had a couple of years ago. And speaking of which, let's actually begin with Minnesota. And of course, I'm not going alphabetical order in terms of the emotion index. And for the Loons, I'm gonna say they're right here. So I know that game against Colorado, I know a lot of Loons fans were upset about that game, and rightfully so. That was definitely an embarrassing performance that the Loons played against the Rapids, and no doubt you could argue that was the worst performance that Minnesota had played so far this season. Well, actually, I will say that the game against Seattle will always be the worst performance because, the fact that they just got absolutely destroyed in that game. Or maybe the previous one when they play against the Rapids, where they were up 2-0 in the game, and then they of course blew it late. Although actually, I don't think that was bad, but more like they just kind of collapsed. But when you look at those bad memories in the beginning of the season, people forgot that this team have now gone 7-game unbeaten streak prior to they losing to the Colorado Rapids. And because they've gone on that 7-game unbeaten streak, it has got them from being deep into the basement of the Western Conference to now above the red line. Now, when you look at where they're in the standings, are they still at a position where I want them to be by the end of the regular season? Absolutely not. I mean, this team should not be a fringe playoff team, and if they are kind of like a fringe playoff team or even miss the playoffs, then this would definitely be a failure of a season considering what they achieved last year. But there's no doubt that things are looking up, and that, as I said, when they start the season and for, there was a lot of doom and gloom with this team, and is this just a year where they completely underachieve and completely gone backwards of the progress that they made in the last 2 years. But ever since that 7-game unbeaten streak, that does calm some of the nerves of the fans that maybe this is kind of a loss year, and they can go on another unbeaten run after they had their last one ended against the Rapids, then there's no doubt this team is going to continue to rise above the Western Conference table. But now at number 2, and at number 2 is going to be Sporting KC, and yeah, Sporting KC is pretty much here. I mean, it's hard to believe, but we talked about how in the Western Conference, how the Seattle Sounders are by far the best team in the Western Conference and really the best team in the league. But when you look in the points standing, SKC is not that far. Like, you look at the total points that they have, I think it's only like a 1 point or 2 point gap between them and the Sounders, and there's actually at one point where SKC actually overtook the Sounders in terms of that top spot. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Sounders, they drew tons of game even in their historic 13-game unbeaten run to start the season, and because SKC didn't draw a lot of those games and have pretty much almost the same wins as the Sounders has, that is the reason why they are actually closer than what people think that they have. And it's kind of interesting how, for this season, in some way, they kind of proved me wrong with the fact that, last year, yes, they finished first in the Western Conference, but, they were playing a lot of easy Z team, and they immediately got themselves exposed once they got into the playoffs. Well, this season, it seems like that's not the case, and even there's time when they don't have their most important player, that is Alan Pulido, they still look decent going forward on the attack. Now, there are times where they do have some performance where they just kind of look absolutely lackluster, and that might be something that they need to kind of not do, and especially when they do actually face the best team in the league, and that I can't wait until they face against the Seattle Sounders, where that could really be a good measuring stick of whether or not are they actually going to be a team that might be the closest in terms of competing the Sounders for the Western Conference title by the end of the year. But so far for SKC, things are definitely going well for them, and they're definitely going to be one of those teams that probably is going to finish near the top, or at the bare minimum the top 3 of the Western Conference, and the team that could be competing for MLS Cup this year. Now, moving on into RSL, and for RSL, if you're an RSL fan, I know they're probably going to be happy the fact that they're in 6th place right now in the Western Conference, and they're above the red line after what has gone on this offseason, and how there was so many questions, with the ownership, and also whether or not if they're going to take a huge step backwards this year. And, at 6th place, I think they'll definitely take it, but there is definitely some concern, the fact that when you look at how they got to that position, a lot of that has to do with they have a relatively good start to the season, followed by a really miserable run where they only won like 1 game out of 8, and then they were able to play against Vancouver twice. And, no disrespect to the Vancouver Whitecaps, but they are definitely not a good team, and almost like a free points anytime a team from the West play against the Whitecaps, and those points kind of boost their total a little bit to get themselves above the red line. And in other words, I'm basically saying that they have a relatively easy schedule to start the season. And now when I actually look at their upcoming schedule, which I believe they still have to play the 2 LA team, and they also got the Timbers and I think SKC coming soon, that could be a huge measuring stick of whether or not are they actually a team that is more of a team maybe are going to stick around to be a fringe playoff team, or they're just a pretender, and that the only reason why they're this high up at the table is because of what I said of them getting off to a good start, and also have been playing a couple of easy teams in the past couple of games. So yeah, for that, I think I'll just kind of put them and in the mediocre range. And I think, again, I know a lot of RSL fans will think they should be here, but for me, I feel like they should be here because what if they started to lose those games? And that's when if you start to lose those games and you go through a free fall, there I won't be surprised if RSL fans are going to think be in this tier, or even at this tier if they are going to go in a complete free fall. Speaking of a team that is in complete free fall, and speaking of the team that I didn't want to disrespect them, but they kind of had to make me have to do it because the Whitecaps, they lost both time against RSL in that Rio Tinto derby, also known as a landlord versus renter kind of battle, and yeah, they did not look good whatsoever in both of these games, and they haven't really looked good at all in these last couple of months. I mean, they have one of the longest unbeaten run, or one of the longest winless run. I mean, they wish they're on a long unbeaten run, but they have one of the longest winless run right now in the league, and there's just nothing going right for this team. I mean, the defense is still a mess, and the attack also hasn't been able to score enough goals. I mean, some of their most dangerous pieces, like Cavallini, this season has not lived up to the price tag that they pay him last year, and definitely have not looked like the Cavallini that we saw from last season. Like the one that we saw from last season, even though he didn't score like DP type of number, he still scored enough goals where you think he can definitely improve heading into next season, and it seems like he has definitely regressed. I mean, the only thing that the Whitecaps have done this season in terms of the attack has been mostly on the set piece, and they're one of those teams that I think if you want to talk about who are the best set piece team in the league, Vancouver is definitely one of them. But the problem is, if you're only able to score on set pieces, then that could be a big problem, and we've seen so many times before where teams can only score on set pieces. They don't do well in the league. Like, you can't just simply rely on those as your only weapon in terms of scoring goals. And if you look at this Whitecaps team, and especially in terms of the goals that they scored, like literally I think 70% of the goals have came from set pieces, and it's no surprise why they haven't scored a lot of goals, because again, set piece opportunity, even if you're the best team or at least close to one of the best team in terms of set pieces, you're not going to score as much goals, and those goals cannot just be your only source in terms of the offense that the Whitecaps has been having so far this season. But now moving on to the next team, and another team that is in this fifth tier is FC Dallas. So yeah, for Dallas, I think last time when I did the emotion index, I put them here at the bottom, and I'm pretty sure Dallas fans kind of agreed with me because they are definitely in a situation where, yeah, things have definitely not improved since we hit last time kind of spoke. I mean, yes, they did get that big win against New England, but that was really the only big win that they have so far, and it's been a season where not only the fact that they can't win on the road, which we knew that was the biggest struggle for them coming into this season, but now they're starting to not able to win at home either, and it's just been a miserable season for FC Dallas. And they're kind of one of those teams where it's kind of what I said earlier, where I know it's still 1/3 of the season, we still have a long way to go, but they're kind of one of those teams that could be in that we're gonna throw in the tower early, because it just seems like we're probably not going to make the playoffs this year. But now moving on into the next team, and that's Austin FC. And for Austin, yeah, it hasn't been good for Austin in these last couple of months. I mean, yes, they had that good moment against the Portland Timbers, and I think that probably is maybe the only positive moment that they had in these last couple of months, but they're pretty much suffering from what a lot of expansion teams go through, which is in the first year, it's going to be rough. And right now, when you look at this team, I mean, I don't think this team under Josh Wolf have been terrible, and in some way, I think this team, if you want to compare this team to the FC Cincinnati team in the expansion year, I say Austin is much better than FC Cincinnati, because at least for Austin, they are able to be mostly locked down in terms of their defense, although a lot of that has to do with Brad Stuver kind of playing out of his mind, and barring the last game against LAFC where he made that rare mistake, he has definitely been in contention of potentially even even get his name in terms of the candidate of winning goalkeeper of the year. But the big problem with this team is that this team can't score. Like right now, this team have this is really the biggest Achilles heel, where whenever they get into the final third, they either cannot put a good final ball so that they can set off an opportunity to score, or when they do get those opportunity, they basically waste those chances. And it's no surprise that, I know this sounds like a cliche, but it's true. When you can't score, you can't win games. Like, it doesn't matter how good your defense is. If you're unable to score goals and you're unable to put the ball into the back of the net, which at one point this season, Austin actually went through a long dry spell of period where they haven't been able to score a single goal. And yeah, I mean, unless this issue does not resolve, and I know heading into this summer transfer window, that's something that Austin FC is definitely looking to address. But this does not going to, if this is an issue that they're unable to address, then yeah, I don't think they're going to be a team that is going to be a playoff team. Although I wouldn't blame them for not being a playoff team, because again, a lot of expansion teams don't make it to the playoffs in their very first year. And if you ask me, if you look at these last couple of expansion teams, or even maybe going all the way back to when expansion really started to ramp up during the late 2010s, I think Austin FC may be right kind of below average of what an expansion team is expect heading into this season, but they're definitely not the worst expansion team I've seen so far in the last 10 years. But now moving on to FC Cincinnati. And for Cincinnati, I think they're going to be right next to where Minnesota is, because I know, yes, it was a frustrating 2-2 draw against the Columbus Crew, and in some way they clearly should have won that one, because how in the world do you go 2-0 up, and you also have a man advantage by the time you were 2-0 up, and you're playing at home, and you still unable to get the victory and basically concede 2 goals against Columbus to drew 2-2. But besides that game, when you look at these last couple of games that Cincinnati has had, I mean, this is probably the best run and the best form that Cincinnati has ever had so far in their franchise history. I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, you look at the points total that they got in during this 5-game stretch that they have. This is almost or not almost, but exactly 2 points per game in terms of the last 4 games that they run, and that's kind of playoff form with the way it is. Now, obviously, I don't think this team is a team that maybe is going to get to the playoffs, and at best, I would say that this team could be a fringe playoff team. But honestly, at the beginning of the season, we talk about how FC Cincinnati, their goal of this season is really just be a respectable MLS team. I mean, they don't necessarily need to make it to the playoffs, but after the disaster that they've been put in the first 2 seasons in MLS, they just need to be respectable and not finish dead last in the standings. And compared to just a couple of weeks ago, and really last month, when they were sitting bottom or sitting near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, it looked like it was that kind of a year once again for them. But yeah, what a great response from them, and especially the fact that they've been able to get wins, not so far in this stretch, but they're able to get wins on road, which it's very odd to see that, this team, they have yet to win a single game at their new building TKL Stadium, but on the road, you look at their record, like they have probably one of the best road records so far out of any team, and it's just kind of strange to see that, considering that this team in their first 2 years, they weren't good on the road or at home, but now all of a sudden they're good on the road, which kind of goes against the trend of how MLS team, they tend to usually do better at home rather than they actually do on the road. But they can fix their home form, and if they maybe can continue the road form that they've been on in these last couple of games, and yeah, maybe they have a shot in terms of the playoffs, and could be maybe sneak into that 7 or 60 in the Eastern Conference. But now moving on to the next team, and that's LAFC. And for LAFC, they're going to be right here. So there's no doubt LAFC has risen up to the Western Conference. They actually gone all the way up to 5th place in the Western Conference, and they're slowly started to catch up to some of the top team in the West, and we're starting to slowly finally see this team to belong to the place that they're supposed to be. I mean, it's kind of remarkable the fact that they've been stuck below the red line for so long this season. Now, granted, yes, they haven't have a relatively easy schedule, and this is what I kind of said in my last emotion index, where when you look at this easy schedule that LAFC had, they have to take advantage of it, and they have to get these points, and for the most part, they've been able to do so, which, that's kind of the reason why they have got themselves getting above the red line and sitting in a comfortable position in terms of the playoff picture in the Western Conference. Now, that being said, I think there are still a lot of concern for this LAFC team. I mean, one of the biggest concern is the fact that, when you look at some of their most important player like Carlos Vela and Diego Rossi, and I know Rossi, of course, did score a goal in the last game, and also Vela did get an assist, and we did see that classic Rossi and Vela kind of combination, but we haven't seen that a lot this season, and I still think this attack, both of those most important guys, they're still not contributing at the rate that I thought they would, and it's hard to believe, but you know how I think 2 years ago where we talked about how this LAFC attack was unstoppable, and they're kind of like the Atlanta United that we know of in their second year, where they basically play free-flowing soccer, but now it just seems like they're following the same direction that Atlanta United is, and that is they look toothless going forward on the attack at times. Now, granted, unlike Atlanta United, at least they still have some of their more important players, and they have still able to get some resort there and there, but when I look at this team, I just still don't think this team is an MLS Cup contender. And I know the media are going to continue to say that they are, and they're going to say that they're still going to be considered the best team in the league. But when you just look at this team, and even with some of the recent wins that they have, and really as long as they don't win against teams that is in the playoff picture, or maybe some of the best team in the league like SKC or Seattle or even the Galaxy, I just really can't take them as an MLS Cup contender. I mean, they could get to the playoffs, but once they get to the playoffs and once they do play against those good teams, that's when I worry they probably won't win against them, because this season they haven't shown to me at all when they do face against those good teams they've been able to beat them, whether at home or on the road. But now moving on to the Chicago Fire, and for Chicago, yeah, they're definitely right here, and this is another team just like FC Cincinnati, and actually I'm just going to put them right around the same tier as Cincinnati, because they kind of share the similar story where, remember how when both of these teams play against each other in the Wooden Spoon Derby a couple of weeks ago, and how it seems like both teams, their season is pretty much a write-off, and whoever wins the Wooden Spoon Derby probably is not going to win the Wooden Spoon, and the loser is probably going to be the team that wins the Wooden Spoon, but that doesn't seem like it's the case, because ever since that derby, both of these teams have definitely make a good run, and for the Chicago Fire, this beginning of the season of the biggest issue where they just cannot score goals, well, in the last couple of games, they have scored nine goals in the last 3 games, and this attack have finally started to get going, and this is kind of what I expected. I mean, this Chicago Fire team, and especially on the attack, is too good to be struggling to score goals, as we saw in the first couple of games. And I think what is even the biggest positive for the Fire going forward is that Beric finally got his goal in the last game. And we saw this last season when Robert Beric, last season when he kind of had that dry spell, and I talk about he's like the most cursed striker in the league. Well, as soon as he finally broke that curse, he started to go on a run that ends up to be one of the best goals scored, and almost finished at the top of the goal scoring chart and almost won the Golden Boot. Well, if he can replicate that form in 2020 into 2021 and pretty much did the same thing, then this Chicago Fire team can definitely be dangerous again. And another thing that I've been remarkably surprised about this Fire team is for once they look consistent. I mean, that's something I don't say a lot with this team, consider how they always have been a very inconsistent and almost an unpredictable team to predict. Like, it's like, what kind of Chicago Fire team are we going to see? Are we going to see that team that looks like a playoff team, or are we going to see that team that looks like a wooden spoon kind of team? But at least in the last 3 games, we have seen a team that looked like they're hungry to make the playoffs and hungry to try to dig themselves out of that deep hole to start this season and get themselves back into the playoff picture. But now moving on to Orlando City, and well, Orlando doesn't need any trouble in terms of getting themselves out of a hole, because they got off to a good start, and they kind of continue that good start throughout. Now, I will say this for Orlando City, I know their fans are kind of a little bit concerned in terms of the last couple of games, where I think they have now lost back-to-back games ever since they had that incredible week. Remember that week where they were able to win 5-0 against the Quakes, and then a couple of days later, followed by a big derby win against Inter Miami, and that was probably considered one of the best week that Orlando City has ever had in team history. But ever since that week, yeah, it's been kind of rough for them in these last couple of games. And the good news for them is that the team that they're chasing at the top of the standing, New England, they also have had their struggle in this past week too. But yeah, for Orlando City, they kind of slowed down a little bit, and maybe you would say that this is kind of a bleep that they're going through. But the big question now is that can they get out of that bleep? And we've seen before where, even some of the best team in the league, we know they do go through a down period, but it's important to see they immediately just recover from that and doesn't actually turn that bleep into pretty much a complete free fall and complete meltdown and get them dropping down the standings if they go through a winless run in these next couple of games. And I just think when you look at this Orlando team, I don't think that's going to happen. I just think these last couple of games, they might have feel what I always say kind of like just I forgot what was the word to say it, but they kind of feel like the letdown from what happened in the previous week when they had probably the best week in their franchise history. Now, moving on to number 11 of this emotion index, and as I mentioned before, this emotion index is going to be relatively long, but the 11th team I'm going to put here on the emotion index is the San Jose Earthquakes, and for the Quakes, I'm going to put them here. I'm not going to put them right at this tier yet, even though I know a lot of Quakes fans will say that this team looks like it's in a complete free fall, and this seems like it's going to be a loss year for this team. And the reason why I'm not at that point yet, and I'm kind of want to be a little bit optimistic with the Quakes, which, if you know me, I'm never tends to always be optimistic with this team. I'm more tends to go through the pessimistic kind of viewpoint, but I kind of want to be optimistic because, now we know Jesse Fornelli is no longer the GM of this team, and this is really now truly Matias Almeida team. I'm just hoping that we're going to see something we've seen before with Almeida, where yes, this is a bad run that the Quakes have gone through, and yes, the Quakes have not won since May, and it has really hurt their themselves in terms of the standings now, going deeper and deeper down in terms of the Western Conference. But I'm just hoping that if this team can break out that winless run, which it's not going to be easy because the next game is going to be Colorado on the road and Sporting KC on the road, and it will be a miracle if they even get a point out of both of those games. But as long as they can get out of the bad winless run, this team can definitely start a run, because we've seen it before where even at the lows of lows, as long as if the Quakes gets a win, that's when Almeida is going to start the magic, where, this is kind of the Almeida experience. It's like a roller coaster ride. Right now, the Quakes are at the very bottom, but I have a feeling most likely they're going to start to go back up. And, if Almeida maybe even makes some summer signings and maybe get some more reinforcements to help that roller coaster goes back up, then, yeah, that would definitely help the cause. And that I still believe the fact that, it might be too early to kind of throw in the towel for the Quakes, even though I know it's been a bad season for them. I'm just hoping we're going to see that Almeida experience again. And if not, then yeah, I have a feeling Almeida might be in trouble, and that he could potentially get the axe, especially if there's going to be a new GM coming in to the Quakes very soon. Now, at the next team, and at number 12, we got Montreal. And for Montreal, it's pretty much so far so good. I mean, this team, I talk about how the Free Canadian team have been really struggling this season, but Montreal so far this year, for the most part, they've been doing relatively well. I mean, I know a couple of weeks ago they did find themselves below the red line, but that's because the East, is still relatively congested, and then Montreal was able to get back-to-back wins that now get themselves up to, I believe, 4th place in the Eastern Conference. And really for Montreal, what I've been very impressed Wilfred Nancy team is that this team just able to grind out victory. I mean, this might be a team that not played the prettiest soccer you can imagine, but this is a team that has a very good defensive structure, and they're able to score just enough goals to win games. And in some way, that kind of reminds me a little bit of Nashville last season and a Gary Smith Nashville team, where they might not have a lot of attacking powers and studded player going forward, but as long as they keep a good compacted defensive shape and don't make mistake on the defensive end, they will always have chance to win games if they can score maybe 1 or 2 goals. And that's what Montreal has been doing throughout this season. Now, the question is, can they of course continue that? That will definitely be something to see, and we've seen before where, even when teams that have had this kind of run, eventually things are going to kind of start to fall apart. And Montreal, of course, have a good history in the past where even things are starting to go well, it's eventually going to catch up to them, and they're going to really go through a slide. But as of now, I think Montreal fans are definitely going to be enjoying life, the fact that they're above the red line, and consider a lot of people, and I'm going to admit it, myself included, saying that they're going to be probably finished dead last in the Eastern Conference. Yeah, that prediction, it looks worse and worse every time when Montreal got themselves back up above the red line as of now. But now moving forward to Columbus, and for Columbus, they're going to be right here. So I know Columbus is below the red line right now, but I will give them the excuse, the fact that they of course had to deal with CCL early this season, which kind of put them behind the 8 ball, and that's kind of the case for pretty much most of these teams that is in CCL. But another thing that I'll give Columbus the benefit of the doubt is that they've been dealing with just tons of injury. And you know how in the beginning of the season we talked about how this team is just very, very deep. Well, unfortunately, it seems like the MLS god saw that, and he basically decided to really put that depth to the test. And it just feels like maybe as the season goes on, and with just so many injuries that has happened, including the Columbus at one point of the season, maybe down to like the 3rd or 4th strings kind of starting 11. Yeah, it started to really kind of take a toll to this team. But at least the good news with this team is that once they do get some of those players back from the IR, I expect this team should be much better than they are currently in right now. But obviously the big question is if they do get those players back. I mean, they are going to get those players back, but there's no guarantee if there's going to be more injuries that is going to arrive, because this season they have been probably one of those teams that has been bitten by the injury bug the hardest out of anyone. But now, moving on to the Dynamo. So for Houston, yeah, they're right here. So after a hot start the Dynamo has had this season, yeah, things are starting to fall apart. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of the 2019 season. Remember when 2019, where the Dynamos got off to a good start, and they actually were like near the top part of the Western Conference, and then they completely fell apart. And you know why they completely fell apart? Yeah, they were playing some easy team to start the season, and when they do face against those tough teams, they got found out, and they basically kind of what we call them a pretender. And it's unsurprising that once they do face against those tough teams, they start to nosedive down the standings. Now this season, that isn't really the case. I mean, they have faced some tough team and able to get resort, but it's been a while since they have got a resort, and this is even when they play against teams that you would think they should beat, and especially playing at home, and that they should be able to get all 3 points that they have done so well in the beginning of the season. That's just not the case in these last couple of games, and we knew that as soon as if this team started to drop points at home, you knew they were going to be in serious trouble, because we know this team struggle on the road, and it's unsurprising this season the road form is an utter disaster for the Dynamo this season. I mean, I don't think they even have won a single game so far on the road, and the only time I remember they actually got a point was against LAFC, but other than that, they just have not done well whatsoever on the road. And this is what I said about how when teams don't do well on the road, you better make sure you do well at home, because if you start to struggle and you start to drop points at home, it is going to really take a toll on you. And this is also kind of maybe the reason why we might get to a part of this league history where maybe that old saying where win your home games and make sure you get points on the road might not actually be kind of valid anymore, because rarely any teams are able to do so. And we see more and more time often as we get into these last couple of years where there's more teams that have been able to do much better on the road compared to past couple of years. And it's unsurprising that we have seen more times or not where teams haven't been able to get wins and have been dropping more points at home than we've seen previous year, because teams are now able to start to do better on the road. And it seems like now the new philosophy is make sure you win your home games, but also make sure if you don't win your home games, you better do well on the road, even though you might not be one of those teams that do well on the road. But now moving on into number 15, and I think we're over the halfway point, and that of course is the Seattle Sounders. And yeah, I mean, there's really nothing I need to say about the Sounders of explaining why everything is awesome and why their fans are going to be continue to be obnoxious saying that they're the best team in the league, and they deserve, because they are the best team in the league, and they own the record now as the longest unbeaten run to start the season. And yeah, right now the only question is who can actually stop the Seattle Sounders. I mean, I know eventually they are going to probably lose their first game. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're not the 2004 Arsenal, but you know, the big question is who's going to stop them first. And you know, I would want to say maybe it could be Minnesota heading into the next game, because you know, as I will talk about in the preview, I do fancy that the Loons could have some revenge against the Sounders, especially the fact that the game is going to be playing at Allianz Field, mainly because if you ignore that bad loss that the Loons had against Colorado, you know, I just have a feeling this might finally be the time where they finally get their first win against Seattle. And if that's the case, they might be the first one to finally cause the Sounders the first loss of the season. And not to mention, you know, I know the Sounders are going to be probably happy about that record, but it's going to be interesting to see how long that's going to take. And you know, is it going to get to a point where they might think too much about that record, and eventually they're going to, or they might think too much about they might think that they of course have reached the record and they don't really need to kind of extend it anymore, and eventually they finally lose a game. Actually, that actually isn't the right way to say. But all I'm saying is, you know, we could potentially see the Sounders lose the first game, and that game against Minnesota, especially on the road, that's going to be one that could potentially be finally the moment where the Sounders finally lose their first game, and finally every single team we've seen so far this season lost at least one game. Now, moving on to another team that is currently feeling everything is awesome is New England, who is leading the Eastern Conference. And as I said, I know Revs fans are going to be feeling a little bit uneasy after these last couple of games where they definitely have not been playing like they were in the beginning of the season, especially on the defensive end, where they have been kind of a little bit sloppy, although a lot of that has to do with them not having Matt Turner in goal in these last couple of games. But yeah, you know, for the Revs, you know, I still think everything is going well, and that, you know, as long as you're at the top of your respective conference, you can't really go anywhere lower than so far so good, because you know, you're the best team in the Eastern Conference, and all you need to do now is to keep that title and ride that momentum heading into the postseason. Now, moving on to the LA Galaxy. And for the Galaxy, I think they're still right here where so far it's still fairly well for the Galaxy, and this is another one I don't really need much explaining, where, you know, they're definitely exceeding expectation that they have heading into this season, where this year was supposed to be a rebuilding year for them under Greg Vanney, but you got to give him a lot of credit getting this team to be back at the spot that they are. Now, I will say this, you know, when I look at this team, do I think this team might be a team that can consider to be a contender in the Western Conference? Probably not, because I still feel feel like the reason why the Galaxy are doing so well this season is mainly to do with Chicharito really carrying the team on the attacking end, and the fact that their defense hasn't really looked that bad, but it's mostly because they have another goalkeeper that could be in contention of winning goalkeeper of the year. That is Jonathan Bond, that has been making some big saves to keep them in game. But obviously, the reason why I say that they might not be a contender is because, what happened if Chicharito goes down injured, or we saw that was the case in these last couple of games of him going down injured. And yes, they were able to get the win against FC Dallas, and they did had a couple of players score even when Chicharito is not there. But again, that was FC Dallas. They're one of the worst team right now in the Western Conference. And not to mention, when the Galaxy do play against good team, they're kind of also in that same situation that their intercity rival LAFC is in, is that when they do play against those good teams, they tend to disappear, and especially Chicharito tends to not show up when they play the likes of Seattle in those kind of games. And we'll see whether or not if the Galaxy does get to play the Sounders again, which I think they play them one more time because they already played them twice, whether they can face up the challenge. And also, it's going to be interesting to see when they do play against SKC again, and this is why it was just so unfortunate to not have Chicharito face against SKC, because that's another game where he can really test against a really good team that they might be facing in the playoffs, and see whether or not if he, of course, would show up. But now, moving on to Inter Miami. Yeah, they're still right here. And for Miami, it's kind of like they're also in that stage where they're kind of throwing the towel early because, nothing seems to go right for this team whatsoever. And, I'm kind of surprised the fact that Phil Neville is still has a job right now. I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised, because maybe Miami is taking the approach what I always said of how, usually when you have a first-year head coach, you usually don't fire him even when things are going terribly, until probably in 2/3 into the season. And, if Inter Miami continue to be as bad as they are right now, then, yeah, there's no doubt that Phil Neville is probably going to get the axe. And, when you also look at this team that they currently have, it's just clearly not good enough. And just I just feel like they might have to do a complete squad overhaul, and maybe have to do it all over again. Kind of do what FC Cincinnati did a couple of years ago, where when the first year turns out to be a disaster, they try to nuke it and try to start again, and then they of course nuke it again for the second time, because that second year didn't work out. But for Inter Miami, this just feels like it's the case where they're probably going to have to drop a nuke to this team heading into this offseason, or maybe start to do so in the summer transfer window, and maybe start all over again and trying to rethink all a different strategy that clearly did not work out for them in the first time. Like the first strategy, I guess what they were trying to do was maybe get some of those European superstar players to come to their team and hope it, of course, will work out, and then get a couple of guys that maybe are proven MLS player, but they're kind of also on either on the wrong end of 30s, or they haven't really been able to exceed their expectation. And this is where you got a team that Inter Miami is currently in right now. And also, not to mention, they're trying to maybe play a couple of players that is out of position, and it just turns out it does not work out whatsoever. But also, that was kind of more of a Diego Alonso situation. I think Phil Neville, for the most part, he's been much more consistent in terms of what he's trying to do in terms of the formation. But still, when you look at the identity of this team, it is still very confusing. What in the world is this team supposed to be? Is this supposed to be a team that is a counter-attacking team, or a possession team? What is it? I mean, they're still suffering the same thing that I said that plagued them last season, which is they just don't have an identity whatsoever. But moving on to the Philadelphia Union. So for the Union, I think they're going to be right here, where they're pretty happy where they are right now. I mean, I know these last couple of games, things haven't worked out for them, and they're kind of also one of those top team in the East, where it's hard to believe when you look at some of the top team in the East, they did not had a good week last week where they have been dropping points and also losing game, despite the fact that when you look at their record, they're some of the best record in the league right now. And the Union was one of those teams where ever since they got that 8-game unbeaten run came to an end, things have not been very rosy for the Union in these last couple of games. But as I said, because of the fact that some of those teams above them haven't been doing so well either, they didn't really lose any ground to them, and that if they can definitely turn things around, then those teams above them are going to be continue to struggle. They can definitely get themselves back into a familiar position, which is the top of the Eastern Conference. But now moving on to the 20th team that I put here on the board, and that is the Portland Timbers. And yeah, talk about rough week. The Timbers definitely had a rough week last week and these last couple of games where, yeah, they got absolutely destroyed by Austin FC 4-1, and then they of course lost at home against Minnesota. And I just kind of feel like, I know I said before the Timbers have been doing a good job in terms of staying afloat and staying above the red line, despite the fact that they have tons of injury issues and also recently have some players missing due to international duty. But as I always say, you can have injuries and you can maybe stay above water, but eventually it's going to sink you. And right now it feels like it have finally sunk this Timbers team, and it's no surprise that this injuries has really kind of took a toll on them. Kind of similar to what I said about Columbus too, where you can have only as many injury until things start to really go wrong and things are going to start to take a toll. And right now that just feels like the thing for the Timbers. I mean, I think the only good thing that they'll hope for is that they're going to get some of those players back. And I guess the good news is some of those players that they missed during international duty, they're probably going to get them back. However, the bad news is that, since we have the Gold Cup, and I mentioned before how every single team is going to basically get hit by this and at least have a couple of players that is going to be missing because of Gold Cup action. And I know the Timbers are going to have a couple of players that is going to be in the Gold Cup, and it's almost like, yeah, it's good news that we got some of our players that maybe participate in the Copa America or in the Euros back, but now we lost some other players that is going to be going to the Gold Cup. I mean, this is why this is why I feel like this year is equally as challenging as last season, because I know last season we had that stop and go kind of situation where the league basically they've gone through it almost felt like there was like 3 different season and 3 different off season because of how stop and go it was. But this season it's equally difficult too, because you have these big tournaments that is pretty much meshed all together in the summer, and a lot of these teams are hit by it because of this. But yeah, moving on to Nashville West team, and for Nashville, I'm gonna say they're here. So for Nashville, I know they're currently 4th in the Eastern Conference, or actually I think they're 5th in the Eastern Conference because I said Montreal was in 4th, or actually it might be the other way around. But I know they're 4th in the Eastern Conference, and you might think their fans are probably happy because they're in a stable playoff position. But I think the reason why I put them there, and maybe their fans should be a little bit concerned, is the fact that most of the games so far they play has been at home. And when you also look at most of the games that they've been playing at home, yes, they have kind of done a good job in terms of some of these games getting wins, but I still feel like they're not getting enough wins for me to consider them to stay at the spots that they're currently in. And especially how many times this season I've talked about how Nashville SC has been unable to get a win and have been getting tons of draws at home. And you just wonder, those draws, are they going to come back to potentially haunt them heading into the second half of the season when they have a ton of road games? That is going to happen. Now, so far, when you look at their road record, which, I think they only play on the road 4 times so far this season, they have only lost once so far on the road, and that was against the Red Bulls. But even that, that's still a very small sample size, and that there's just no guarantee, when they do have that heavy road record, whether or not if they can continue that form where they can able to get points on the road or even get a couple of wins on the road to keep them at the position that they have. And this is why I just feel like for this team, when I look at the points that they have, I feel like the points that they collect so far at home, I think it's going to be enough for them to maybe be a fringe playoff team, if they of course are able, in case if they aren't able to do well on the road in the second half of the season. But if they keep dropping points at home, and of course if they don't do well on the road, then they could definitely be in serious trouble. Even though I said that this team, even in the position that they have, you got to keep in mind that second half of the schedule, especially of a heavy road schedule, that is going to be a very tough kind of run that Nashville SC will have to face. And I just fear that run could potentially derail their chances, and they might even go through a mini free fall if they don't do well in terms of that stretch. But now moving on to NYCFC. And for NYCFC, they're right here. And they're pretty much the definition of we're mediocre, but at least we're not totally terrible, because, yeah, they are a very mediocre team and a very inconsistent team this season. Like, there's times where this NYCFC team have shown its potential, and all the attacking talent that they have are able to be in showcase, and they look like could be a team that maybe be a contender in the East. And then there's time where they just look like they're not a contender in the East and look like they're probably maybe going to make the playoffs, and it's another first round exit, and it just feels like they're heading that way again. And that has to be very frustrating if you're an NYCFC fan, where it's getting to a point where you really wish your team could maybe get past the second round, or even in most cases get past the first round. But it just feels like all direction of how this team is playing right now is going to have a first round exit, and it just feels like they're stuck in that wheel of unfortune. And that again, I probably should have put them right here instead of here, because of how many of these NYCFC fans will feel like with this team, with the fact that they're going to be going through a first round exit, and that feels even worse than maybe of some of these teams that is not making the playoffs, because they've done it so many times. But now moving on to their intercity rival, the New York Red Bulls. And for the Red Bulls, they're going to be right here. So for the Red Bulls, this season, how I talked about how with an MLS team, if you want to make the playoffs, you need to make sure you get all your home points, and maybe on the road you can maybe salvage a couple of wins or a couple of road points to get yourself in the playoffs. Well, the Red Bulls are basically using that formula this season. Now, unfortunately, that formula, as I said before, seems to be a little bit outdated and seems to only get yourself maybe on the fringe and just gets into the playoffs. And it just feels like that, of course, is the case where, it's unsurprising the Red Bulls are in that last playoff position in the Eastern Conference. And, I feel like if they are going to once again make the playoffs again, which, if they keep up what they're doing right now, they're definitely going to do it, then unfortunately they're going to be in the same situation that NYCFC is going to be in, where once they do get into the playoffs, maybe I don't think they have enough to potentially play against a relatively good team, and maybe play against the likes of New England or Orlando City. Although if they do face Orlando City, I think they will take that, because it seems like they're the only team that has been able to figure out Orlando City. But let's say if they play against Philly or New England on the road, then that could be a serious issue, because they still have not been able to figure them out. So yeah, at least they of course will make the playoffs, but it just feels like the way that this season is kind of what I thought that the Red Bulls were going to do, which is they're going to be making the playoffs, but they're going to be once again stuck in that purgatory kind of territory, where they're just good enough to make the playoffs, but once they get into the playoffs, they can't really go any further past the first round when they do face against real good teams that have MLS Cup aspiration. But now moving on to Atlanta United, and for Atlanta, unfortunately, yeah, things have definitely turned to look like 2020 all over again. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've also have been hit hard with injuries, and also players that is missing during international duty. And there's definitely a lot of question whether or not if Joseph Martinez is going to be back in time heading into this week's action, because we talk about how he was one of those players that unfortunately suffered from COVID-19 during his time playing for Venezuela in the Copa America tournament, and we'll see whether or not if there's a special protocol of him not able to come back to this team right when this tournament have just finished a couple of days ago. But yeah, they desperately miss him, and they also are desperate in terms of finally finding someone that can actually score the goals for them, because when you look at this team in these past couple of games, this looked very 2020 Atlanta United like, and that is something that I think Atlanta fans do not want to hear, because they do not want to remember what happened last season, of how much of a disastrous year that was for this team, and for a team that this season had expectation to get back to the level that they had. These last couple of games, and really this season in general, is not what they have envisioned. And this is also maybe another reason why I think I talk about how there are head coach that is definitely going to be under the hot seat. I feel Gabriel Heinze feels the hot seat, because for sure this Atlanta ownership, they do not have a lot of patience in terms of seeing their head coach spending time and able to get this team doing well. As soon as if things are not going to go well, and as soon as if the fans start to turn on Gabriel Heinze, don't be surprised he could be end up in the unemployment line, and could be the latest head coach that could potentially get the sack. But now moving on to DC United. For DC, they're right here. So for DC, they're one of the few teams that, even though they're not above the red line, I still put them at this spot where I think their fans are probably very happy of how the team is. And again, even though they're not above the red line right now, they're actually very close. They're actually only a point out of that. And I talk about how tight the Eastern Conference is, and there seems to be a log jam in the Eastern Conference where there's not a lot of points separating the middle part of the standings to near the bottom of the standings. And for DC, when you look at how they play in these last couple of games, and really maybe in these last couple or in this last month or so, ever since they got off to that disastrous start, they have definitely played much better. And how I talked about early this season, where I feel like eventually Hernan Losada is going to get his philosophy into this team, and that this team will start to play more pretty soccer and able to play a team that is definitely not the one that Ben Olsen was taking charge of it just a year ago. And Lord and behold, just after that bad run that they had, and also of them suffering from some injury crisis, they've started to look like the team that I thought Hernan Losada was going to institute and revolutionize. And it's unsurprising that the fact that the last couple of games they have done very well in terms of going forward on the attack, and that they've been a very fun team to watch. And that's something that DC fans have not been able to say ever since 2018, when they had that Lucharu situation and that incredible second half resurgent. Now, if there's one thing I will say DC might need to work on, is the fact that they need to do better in terms of their finishing. I mean, I know, yes, they dropped 7 goals against TFC, but I just feel like this is starting to be a team where it's kind of inconsistent in terms of their attack. Like, there could be times where they could be incredible going forward and on their attack, and they look very good in terms of their finishing. But then there are times where no matter what they do going forward, and no matter how many shots that they put on target or put in front of goal, they just cannot find the ball in the back of the net. But hey, at least that's kind of an improvement to what I said earlier in the season, when they started to kind of get into a good form, where the only thing that was missing from them is finishing, and that they just basically cannot finish whatsoever. So yeah, but moving on in terms of the last two teams, as unfortunately there's fireworks shooting off outside. Obviously very frustrated the fact that they're still shooting fireworks past 4th of July, is the Colorado Rapids. And for Colorado, yeah, they're going to be right here, where so far everything is good for this team. And again, this is another team that got off to a slow start, and people was wondering what's going on with this team. And after this team locking on so many in the contract to this core that they committed, there was definitely concern, if you're a Rapids fan, of how, it looks like this team is going back to those those days a couple of years ago where they were basement dweller in the league. But you can start to see now that in these past couple of months, this team has started to play up to the potential, and you can even maybe say they have improved from last season, and that's definitely good news if you're a Rapids fan, because I know last season I talked about how they were definitely a dark horse team, and that it will be a team that I think when they go to the playoffs, nobody wants to face them. But then obviously we know what happened when they faced against Minnesota, where I think maybe that was more to do with just the experience, where Minnesota just had a little bit more experience compared to Colorado being in the playoffs. And now the fact that heading into the second year, I feel like if this team does make it to the playoffs again, there's no doubt that I think this team is going to be much more dangerous because they have the experience and they learn from it. And I also think that this team, I think this team might be just a step below of what Sporting KC and Seattle has. But at least if you're a Rapids fan, if there is progress where they can at least win one playoff game, or maybe even go deep in as far as the semifinal or even the conference final, or maybe miraculously make it to MLS Cup, then there's definitely progress in terms of this core that they clearly have locked up, and they clearly like this core because of all the contract that they signed them to this off season. But now moving on into the last team, and I know it's been a very long video, but that's what happened when I try to go through all 2017, and that of course is TFC. And for TFC, they are right here, and before Chris Armas was fired last week, I think TFC was right here. Like, they were literally at the very bottom of this emotion index, because I'm pretty sure their fans feel like there's really nothing to cheer about anymore, and that we might as well just throw the towel early, because it's pretty clear that this team is not going to get any better under Chris Armas. And as much as I was hoping maybe Chris Armas wasn't the main reason why this team was hold back in terms of the talent, after they were able to win 3-2 against New England, yeah, it is pretty clear that I think the answer is that Chris Armas clearly hold back in terms of the talent that this team has had. And it's unsurprising the fact that this team immediately started to play so much better and almost looked like the old TFC that we know of these past couple of years, when they were able to win 3-2 against New England on the road. Now, that being said, I will say that we'll see whether or not if they can continue to build on that victory, because remember, that's just one game and they're still stuck near the bottom of the Eastern Conference right now, and it's going to take a lot for them to try to move up the standings, because I know a lot of teams above them, teams like Cincinnati and Chicago, they're also relatively hot. And I would even say DC United is another team that is relatively hot, and that they want to move up the Eastern Conference. And I would for me, I would say that if you're a team that is near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, it's actually not as easy as you would think to move up the standings, even though you're relatively close in terms of that, because of how much I said before, the East seems to be a little bit of a long jam. But the problem is, there's a couple of teams down there in the basement that is on a relatively good run, and when you have teams that, or if you're a team that is near the bottom and you have team around them that also have a relatively good run, then it does make it more difficult to trying to get yourself out of a hole. But again, for this TFC team, if this team can start to play into their potential and start to look much better in the post Chris Armas era, then I think there's no doubt that Chris Armas was the reason why this team doesn't fit. And this also means that whether or not if TFC might even stick with their interim head coach, or maybe potentially look for a new head coach. I think they're probably in the process of doing it right now, but when they do get that new head coach, that is going to be a huge decision. It might be even season kind of determined kind of decision, because if they get it wrong again in terms of hiring a head coach that doesn't fit into the system that Greg Vanney built for this TFC team, this team can easily get back to the form that they were, where they were running in a system with a coach that clearly doesn't fit in terms of what they're trying to do and what they have been so successful following the past couple of years, and it's no surprise that they immediately collapse and start to become a team that has been so bad that kind of reminiscent of the pre-Greg Vanny era. When remember how this team was regularly a basement dweller in the Eastern Conference, and yeah, it seems like Chris Armas was trying to replicate that, and I think a lot of TFC fans can be very relieved the fact that he wasn't able to he was able to accomplish that by putting them near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, or actually as of now I think they're still at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but at least he's not there for the whole year to make sure they get themselves almost to what happened in the pre-Greg Vanny days, where they were regularly a team that were considered the worst team and kind of the afterthought of the Eastern Conference. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for this emotion index. And like I said, I know it was relatively long, but that's what happened when I have to talk about 2017s and where I put them in the emotion index. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video, and if there's any teams that I put too high or too low in the emotion index, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.